Imagine being a small-town teenager fixing old trucks in your backyard. When one day, a broken-down Tesla changes your life forever. What if that Tesla wasn't just any car, but carried one of the most innovative minds of our time, Elon Musk himself? What would you do if your skills opened doors you never thought possible? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. In a small, sun-baked town in central Texas, the days move slowly, marked by the steady hum of engines and the occasional chirping of cicadas. Among the scattered homes and dusty roads, a distinct rhythm echoed from the Callahan backyard, the clang of a wrench, the hiss of air from a compressor, and the faint buzz of determination. 17-year-old Micah Callahan knelt beside an old, battered Chevy truck, its once bright paint now faded into a dull rust red, streaked with years of grime. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his face as beads of sweat trickled down his temples, mixing with the grease smudges on his skin. His hands moved swiftly, adjusting the engine with precision, the tools in his grasp like an extension of his own fingers. Nearby, Mr. Garcia, an elderly neighbor in his 70s, watched anxiously, leaning on a cane. His weathered face creased with both concern and hope as he observed Micah at work. "Think it'll work, Micah?" Mr. Garcia asked, his voice tinged with both skepticism and desperation. "This truck's been nothing but trouble lately." Micah glanced up, a confident yet modest smile spreading across his face. "It'll work, Mr. Garcia. Just give me another minute." He tightened the final bolt, stepping back to examine his work. The engine gleamed in the sunlight, not new, not perfect, but alive with the promise of functionality. Wiping his hands on his oil-stained jeans, Micah leaned against the open hood and called out, "All right, give it a try now." Mr. Garcia shuffled toward the driver's seat, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the door. He settled into the worn leather seat, his gaze flicking between Micah and the key in the ignition. With a deep breath, he turned it. The engine sputtered once, then twice, before roaring to life with a deep, throaty growl. A small puff of smoke escaped the exhaust before settling into a steady hum. Micah's grin widened as he stepped back, admiring the revived machine. "Told you it'd work," he exclaimed, his tone carrying both pride and relief. Mr. Garcia's face lit up with joy, the worry lines softening into a broad smile. "Micah, you're a miracle worker," he said, his voice full of gratitude. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, holding it out to the boy. Micah hesitated, his hands still greasy and his pride too big to take payment. "Oh, I don't need—" "Nonsense," Mr. Garcia interrupted, waving the bill insistently. "You've saved me a trip to the city. That's worth more than this little old 20. Take it." After a moment of reluctance, Micah nodded, slipping the bill into his pocket. "Thanks, Mr. Garcia," he said softly, his tone humble. Mr. Garcia stepped out of the truck and patted the hood with affection. "This old thing's been through a lot, just like me. You've given it another chance, Micah, just like you'll give yourself one someday." Micah looked down, his smile fading slightly as the words sank in. "I hope so, Mr. Garcia," he murmured, his gaze shifting toward the horizon, where the sun hung low, casting everything in shades of amber and gold. As Mr. Garcia climbed into the truck and drove off, the hum of the engine faded into the distance. Micah stood there for a moment longer, wiping his hands on a rag, his mind racing with thoughts of all the broken things he hoped to fix. Not just machines, but the life he dreamed of building for his family. Inside the modest Callahan home, the aroma of reheated leftovers wafted through the small kitchen. Evelyn Callahan, Micah's mother, stood at the counter, her shoulders slightly hunched from a long day at the packaging plant. She turned and smiled as Micah walked in, his hands still streaked with grease. "How'd it go with Mr. Garcia?" she asked, her voice warm but tired. "Truck's running. It wasn't too bad." Evelyn reached over to ruffle his hair, smudging his forehead with more grease. "You've got magic hands, just like your dad." Micah's chest tightened at the mention of his father, but he forced a smile. "I'm just doing what I can." At the small kitchen table, 10-year-old Sadie Callahan sat amidst a sea of papers and crayons, her face scrunched in concentration. "Hey, Micah, do you know how to draw a solar system?" Sadie asked, waving a crayon in the air. Micah chuckled and dropped into the chair beside her. I'm more of an engine guy, but let me see. He leaned over, guiding her hand to create a set of wobbly orbits. There, now it looks like a real one. Sadie giggled. You're terrible at this. Evelyn watched her children, a faint smile on her lips. She knew times were tough, but moments like these reminded her of the love that kept their little family going. Later that evening, under the warm glow of a single bulb in the garage, Micah sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, tinkering with a carburetor he had salvaged from a junkyard. His mind wandered as he worked, thinking of his father, who had passed away in a tragic accident at the same packaging plant where Evelyn now worked. Don't let life's setbacks stop you, kid. Mr. Harlan's gravelly voice echoed from the doorway. Micah looked up to see the retired mechanic standing there, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his overalls. Your dad used to say that all the time. He'd be proud of you. Micah's throat tightened. I want to do something bigger, Mr. Harlan. I want to build something that matters. Mr. Harlan stepped into the garage and patted Micah's shoulder. You've got the hands for it, Micah, and the heart. That's what counts. Micah sat on the steps of the porch, staring at the stars scattered across the sky. In his mind, he pictured a world where he could take care of his family, a world where his talents could mean something more than fixing old trucks. But for now, the hum of engines and the warmth of his family would have to be enough. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty stretch of highway outside Bastrop, Texas. The heat shimmered off the asphalt, making the deserted road look like a mirage. Micah Callahan pedaled his old bike along the shoulder, a sack of salvaged car parts slung over his back. The weight tugged at him, but he didn't mind. It was another piece closer to completing his latest project, a working engine he'd been building from scratch. As he rounded a bend, the sight of a sleek black limousine parked on the side of the road caught his attention. A plume of steam hissed from under the hood, curling into the hot air. Micah slowed his bike, curiosity overtaking caution. A man in a dark suit stood by the open hood, his sleeves rolled up, gesturing angrily into his phone. Can't get another car out here for hours? The man snapped, his frustration echoing through the quiet. This is ridiculous. I have my boss in the back, and we're stranded. Need some help? Micah called, keeping his tone casual but loud enough to be heard over the hiss of the engine. The man, startled, turned to face him. His sharp features and perfectly pressed attire didn't match the sweaty frustration on his face. Help? He repeated, raising an eyebrow. Kid, do you even know what kind of car this is? Micah shrugged, stepping closer. Looks like a custom Tesla Model S, am I right? The man blinked, his skepticism wavering for a moment. Yeah, but I doubt you've ever worked on something like this. Micah set down his sack of parts and peered under the hood. The engine compartment was a maze of advanced technology, but the issue wasn't hard to spot. A ruptured coolant hose spraying fluid onto the battery casing. I think I can patch it up, Micah said, at least enough to get you moving again. The man, Max Sterling, as Micah later learned, crossed his arms, his doubt clear. And what exactly are you going to use? Chewing gum and duct tape? Micah smirked. Something like that? Max crossed his arms, leaning against the side of the limousine, watching Micah with a skeptical glare. Kid, he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. You really think some scrap from your backpack is going to fix this? This isn't a tractor, it's a Tesla. You even know what you're looking at? Micah didn't respond right away. Instead, he examined the ruptured hose closely, testing its flexibility with his fingers, and squinted at the sprayed coolant that had pooled near the battery casing. He muttered softly to himself, as if cataloging the problem. Finally, he looked up. The coolant line burst, he said matter-of-factly, and it's leaking onto the battery casing. That could short-circuit the system if it gets worse. Max blinked. And your plan is... Micah pulled a small roll of heavy-duty tape from his sack, followed by a length of worn rubber tubing. I'll patch the hose with this tape to stop the leak, then swap in this tube I've been keeping for spare parts. It's not perfect, but it'll hold long enough to get you moving. Max frowned, his arms tightening across his chest. I don't think you understand. This isn't just any car. One wrong move, and you'll fry the whole system. Micah met Max's doubtful gaze. You have another option. Unless you've got a Tesla mechanic hiding in the trunk, this is your best shot. Max's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside with a reluctant nod. Fine, but if this thing explodes, it's on you. Micah knelt beside the car, his fingers working with practiced precision. He carefully cut a clean section of the rubber tubing, testing it for size against the broken coolant line. Max leaned over, arms still crossed, but this time his gaze was more curious than dismissive. "Where'd you even learn to do this?" Max asked. "My dad taught me," Micah replied without looking up. "He was a mechanic, always said fixing things is about understanding how they're supposed to work first." "You fix a lot of Teslas in your free time, or is this your first shot?" Max's tone was still sardonic, but the edge had softened. Micah smiled faintly, pressing the tape firmly around the patched area. "First time for everything. Don't worry though, I've fixed worse with less." With the makeshift seal complete, Micah wiped his hands on his jeans, smudging more grease onto the worn denim. He stood up and stepped back, gesturing toward the car. "Try it now." Max hesitated, his hand hovering over the driver's side door handle. "You sure?" Micah shrugged. "You've got nothing to lose." Max climbed into the driver's seat and took a deep breath. Turning the key, he expected nothing but a hiss of steam, or, worse, a cascade of warning lights on the dashboard. Instead, the engine purred softly to life, the smooth electric hum breaking the stillness of the roadside. He stared at the dashboard, momentarily stunned by the absence of alarms or error codes. "I'll be damned," he muttered under his breath, stepping out of the car. Max's skeptical demeanor melted into something closer to respect as he walked back toward Micah. "You actually did it. The kid who rolled up on a rusty bike fixed a Tesla Model S with duct tape and some junk tubing." Micah grinned, his pride barely concealed. "Told you it wasn't my first fix." Max reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $50 bill. "Here, take it." Micah shook his head, holding up his hands. "I didn't do it for money." Max scowled, thrusting the bill toward him. "Look, kid, just take it. A professional shop would have charged me a couple $100 for even looking at this thing. You earned it." After a moment's hesitation, Micah took the money, folding it neatly before tucking it into his pocket. "Thanks," he said, his tone humble. As Max returned to the driver's seat, Micah wheeled his bike upright, watching the limo disappear down the highway. His hands still smelled like rubber and coolant, but his mind was racing faster than his legs as he pedaled home. He had just fixed a Tesla. The thought made him smile, but it was quickly overshadowed by a familiar pang of doubt. Could he ever be more than just a small-town kid fixing cars? Unbeknownst to Micah, the tinted windows of the limo had concealed a keen observer. Elon Musk leaned back in his seat, the corners of his mouth lifting in a quiet smile. "Not bad," he murmured, tapping a finger against his chin. "Not bad at all." The morning sun rose slowly over Bastrop, bathing the Callahan home in a soft golden light. It was another quiet day in the neighborhood, where the rustling of tree branches and the occasional bark of a dog were the only sounds to break the stillness. Evelyn Callahan was already in the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast of toast and eggs. Sadie sat at the table, scribbling on a worksheet, her brow furrowed in concentration. Micah emerged from the small garage, wiping his hands on a rag, the familiar streaks of grease marking his fingers. He'd spent the early hours fine-tuning an old engine he'd salvaged, hoping to sell it for enough money to help cover the electric bill. "Morning, Mom," Micah greeted, reaching for a glass of water. "Morning," Evelyn replied with a smile. "Didn't hear you come in last night. Still working on that old heap?" "Just trying to get it running," Micah said with a shrug. "Might be worth a couple $100 if I can sell it to Mr. Garcia." Before Evelyn could reply, the sound of a powerful engine roared into the neighborhood. The Callahan family turned toward the window, curiosity etched on their faces. Down the street, a sleek black Tesla SUV pulled up in front of their modest home, its polished surface gleaming in the sunlight. "Whoa," Sadie whispered, her pencil frozen mid-scribble. "Are we expecting someone?" Evelyn asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Micah's heart raced as the driver's door opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. It was Max Sterling, the chauffeur from the day before, looking as sharp as ever in his suit and tie. The neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, their curiosity piqued by the unusual sight. Max approached the Callahan house with confident strides, holding a small envelope in his hand. He glanced at Micah as he reached the porch. "Micah Callahan?" Max asked, his voice formal but not unkind. Micah nodded, stepping forward. That's me. Max extended the envelope. This is for you, from Mr. Elon Musk. Micah's mouth fell open as he took the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. He could feel the weight of the moment, the curiosity of the neighborhood pressing in around him. Thanks, Micah stammered. Max tipped his head in a polite nod. He said he's looking forward to meeting you. Don't be late. Without another word, Max turned and walked back to the SUV. The vehicle glided away as smoothly as it had arrived, leaving the street abuzz with murmured speculation. Back inside, Micah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope in his hands. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. Go on, she urged. Open it. Micah carefully tore the envelope open, pulling out a handwritten note on thick, elegant stationery. Dear Micah, I was impressed by your resourcefulness and determination yesterday. If you're interested, I'd like to meet with you to discuss an opportunity at Tesla. Enclosed is an address for a meeting at our headquarters in Austin. Elon Musk. The room fell silent as Micah read the note aloud. Sadie's eyes went wide, and Evelyn's brows knit together in concern. This has to be a mistake, Micah said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would someone like Elon Musk want to meet me? Because you're talented, Evelyn replied firmly, and you deserve this. Micah shook his head. I'm just a kid from Bastrop. I fix old trucks. What could I possibly offer Tesla? Evelyn knelt beside him, looking him straight in the eyes. You've always underestimated yourself, Micah. You have a gift, and it's time the world saw it. Don't let this pass you by. Later that afternoon, Micah pedaled his bike down the familiar dirt path to Mr. Harlan's workshop. The old garage, with its creaking doors and rusted signs, had always been a sanctuary for him, a place where problems could be fixed with enough patience and the right tools. Inside, the rhythmic clinking of a wrench echoed in the air, blending with the faint smell of oil and aged metal. Mr. Harlan, Micah called, his voice wavering slightly. The retired mechanic, hunched over an old engine block, looked up. His weathered hands paused mid-turn on a stubborn bolt. The lines on his face deepened as he broke into a warm, familiar smile. Well, if it isn't my favorite grease monkey, he teased, wiping his hands on a stained rag. What brings you out here, kid? Something on that old bike of yours finally give up? Micah managed a small grin, but said nothing. Instead, he pulled the neatly folded note from his pocket and handed it over with trembling fingers. Mr. Harlan's eyes narrowed as he unfolded the paper, the faint scent of crisp stationery filling the air. His lips moved silently as he read the words, his brows rising higher with each line. When he finished, he let out a low whistle and shook his head. Well, I'll be damned, he said, his voice carrying both surprise and pride. He glanced up at Micah, his grin widening. Elon Musk, huh? Looks like someone out there finally sees what I've been telling you all along. Micah shifted on his feet, his confidence faltering. But what if I mess this up? He asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the floor. What if I go there, and I'm not good enough? He's Elon Musk, and I'm just me. Mr. Harlan studied the boy for a moment, then set the note down carefully on his workbench. His hands, worn and steady from years of labor, reached out and rested firmly on Micah's shoulders. Listen to me, Micah, he began, his voice low but steady. Your dad. He was more than a great mechanic. He saw the world differently. He believed that fixing machines was only part of the job. The real work, that was fixing how people thought about what's possible. And you've got that same spark in you, kid. Micah blinked, his chest tightening as he fought back the doubt clawing at him. But what if... No what ifs, Mr. Harlan interrupted gently. You've got the hands for this, but more importantly, you've got the heart, and people like Musk, they see that. Now, you just need to see it in yourself. The weight of the words hung in the air, heavy yet reassuring. Micah nodded slowly, his gaze meeting Mr. Harlan's. For the first time, a flicker of hope began to break through the uncertainty clouding his mind. Thanks, Mr. Harlan, Micah said, his voice soft but filled with determination. Don't thank me yet, kid, Harlan replied with a chuckle. You've got work to do. Now go show 'em what you're made of. Micah turned and walked his bike toward the fading sunlight, the note safely tucked back in his pocket. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, He allowed himself to believe he might just have what it took to face it. The drive to Austin felt surreal. As Micah sat in the back seat of the Tesla SUV, the sleek interior and whisper-quiet hum of the engine were constant reminders of the opportunity that lay ahead. Max Sterling sat in the front, occasionally glancing at Micah through the rearview mirror. Though Max said little, his presence seemed to carry an air of approval, as if he knew Micah belonged here, even if Micah wasn't sure himself. The Tesla gigafactory loomed on the horizon like a futuristic city, its sprawling architecture gleaming under the Texas sun. Micah craned his neck to take it all in, his breath catching as the SUV approached the massive entrance. Workers and engineers moved purposefully, the facility buzzing with an energy that felt both intimidating and inspiring. "This is it," Max said, his tone unusually warm as he opened Micah's door. "Elon's waiting for you." Inside the gigafactory, the sights and sounds of innovation surrounded Micah. Conveyor belts carried components, robotic arms moved with precision, and sleek Tesla vehicles sat in various stages of assembly. The sheer scale of the operation left Micah awestruck. A tall man in a sharp suit approached, his presence commanding but not overbearing. "Micah Callahan," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Elon Musk." Micah swallowed hard and shook Elon's hand, the gesture firm despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." Elon smiled faintly, his piercing gaze studying Micah. "I've heard a lot about you," he said, his tone both curious and encouraging. "Max tells me you're resourceful, creative. Those are qualities we value here." Micah felt a flush of pride, but it was quickly tempered by doubt. "I just fixed a car," he said quietly, almost as if apologizing. "You didn't just fix a car," Elon countered, his voice firm but not unkind. "You saw a problem and found a solution with limited resources. That's the kind of thinking we need to change the world." Elon led Micah through the factory, explaining the cutting-edge processes that powered Tesla's innovation. From battery production lines to AI-driven robotics, each section was more impressive than the last. Micah's eyes darted between the intricate machines and the focused engineers, his mind racing with questions. As they stopped near a testing area, Elon gestured toward a workbench laden with tools and parts. "Micah," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I'd like to see what you can do. Consider this a hands-on interview." Micah's stomach flipped as he stared at the parts on the table. It wasn't just a pile of components. It was a challenge, one that seemed designed to test not only his skill, but his ability to think under pressure. "We've got a minor issue with one of our battery modules," Elon continued, pointing to a sleek, disassembled unit. "It needs a temporary fix to stabilize its output. I want to see how you'd approach it." Micah hesitated, his heart pounding. The machines around him were far more advanced than anything he'd worked on before, and the eyes of one of the world's most brilliant minds were fixed squarely on him. I don't know if I can," Micah admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Elon raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Why not?" Micah looked down, his hands clenching at his sides. "Because I've never done anything like this. I don't have the education or the experience." "Education and experience are important," Elon interrupted, "but they're not everything. What matters most is how you think, how you adapt. You've already shown you can do that, so why not here?" The words hit Micah like a jolt, stirring something deep within him. He thought of his father, of the nights spent in the garage learning how to repair old engines. He remembered Mr. Harlan's words, reminding him that fixing machines was only part of what he was capable of. Taking a deep breath, Micah stepped forward. "I'll give it a shot," he said, his voice steadier now. Over the next hour, Micah worked methodically, examining the battery module with a mix of curiosity and determination. Elon watched from a distance, occasionally nodding, as Micah improvised solutions with the tools available. At one point, a small crowd of engineers gathered, whispering among themselves as they observed the young man tackling a problem they had underestimated. Finally, Micah stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That should stabilize it," he said, his tone cautious but hopeful. Elon stepped forward and inspected the module, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Not bad," he said, turning to Micah. "Not bad at all." The words sent a surge of pride through Micah, but he tempered it with humility. "Thank you, sir," he said softly. Elon placed a hand on Micah's shoulder, his gaze steady. "I see potential in you, Micah. Real potential. How would you feel about coming back for a more in-depth challenge? Something that could take your skills to the next level?" Micah hesitated, the weight of the offer pressing down on him. He thought of his mother and Sadie, of the responsibilities waiting for him back home. But he also thought of his father's legacy, of the spark that had driven him to dream of something bigger. "I'd be honored," Micah finally said, his voice filled with quiet determination. Elon nodded, satisfied. "Good. Let's see what you're made of." As Micah left the gigafactory that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows over the sleek Tesla vehicles parked outside, he felt a mix of exhilaration and uncertainty. The road ahead was uncharted, but for the first time, it felt like a path worth following. Micah's second visit to the Tesla gigafactory felt different. The initial awe he'd experienced during his first tour had been replaced by a mix of excitement and anxiety. This wasn't just a tour, it was a test. The enormity of the task ahead weighed on him as Max guided him through the bustling corridors. "This is where things get real," Max said with a small grin as he pushed open the door to a workshop filled with bright lights, sleek machinery, and rows of tools. "Good luck, kid." Micah stepped inside, his heart pounding as his eyes scanned the room. The space was filled with engineers working on advanced Tesla battery systems, their focus and efficiency intimidating. He felt out of place in his worn jeans and faded t-shirt, a sharp contrast to their polished uniforms. "Micah Callahan, I presume?" The voice was calm and authoritative, and Micah turned to see a tall woman with sharp features and a confident stance approaching him. She extended a hand. "I'm Dr. Ava Collins," she introduced herself. "I oversee the battery division here at Tesla." Micah shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip. "Nice to meet you, ma'am," he replied, his voice steady despite his nerves. Ava gave him a brief smile. "Elon spoke highly of you. Said you have a knack for solving problems with whatever you've got. Let's see if he's right." She gestured toward a nearby workbench where a disassembled Tesla battery module sat. The sleek casing and intricate components made it look more like a piece of art than a piece of machinery. "This module has a problem," Ava explained. "Its voltage output is unstable, which could lead to performance issues. Your job is to diagnose the issue and find a temporary fix. Tools and parts are on the bench. Let me know if you need anything else." Micah's throat felt dry as he stepped closer to the bench. The module was unlike anything he'd ever worked on. Its advanced circuitry and precision design seemed almost otherworldly compared to the rusty engines he was used to fixing. As Micah began his assessment, whispers started to ripple through the workshop. A group of Tesla engineers nearby exchanged skeptical glances, their murmurs growing louder. "Is this some kind of joke?" one of them said, loud enough for Micah to hear. "They brought in a kid for this?" "Probably just a PR stunt," another added. Micah's hands faltered for a moment, the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. He felt like an outsider, an imposter in a room full of experts. "You okay?" Ava's voice cut through the noise, calm but firm. Micah nodded quickly, his focus returning to the module. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," Ava said, her tone encouraging. "Ignore the chatter. Focus on the work. Show them why you're here." Micah took a deep breath and began systematically checking the module's components. He noticed a slight discoloration on one of the connectors, a tiny detail that seemed out of place. Using a multimeter from the workbench, he measured the voltage and confirmed his suspicion. The connector was damaged, causing intermittent power flow. The fix wasn't straightforward. The module required precision parts that weren't immediately available. Micah glanced around the bench, his mind racing. Then he remembered his father's words. "It's not about having the perfect tools. It's about using what you have to make it work." He picked up a spare wire, a soldering iron, and a small clamp, fashioning a temporary bypass for the damaged connector. The solution wasn't elegant, but it was functional. Micah wiped his brow, stepping back to inspect his work. "Done," he said, his voice steady but quiet. Ava approached, examining the module closely. She tested the output with a diagnostic tool, her expression unreadable. The nearby engineers paused their work, their skepticism palpable as they watched. Finally, Ava turned to Micah with a nod of approval. "Voltage is stable. Good work." Micah felt a wave of relief and pride, but before he could respond, one of the engineers spoke up. "Yeah, but how long will that fix last?" the man said, his tone sharp. "This isn't a backyard project. It's Tesla. Temporary fixes aren't good enough here." Micah's stomach tightened, but Ava held up a hand, silencing the room. "It's a trial," she said firmly. "And he passed. Temporary or not, he solved the problem with the tools he had, and that's exactly what we asked him to do." The room fell silent, the weight of Ava's authority quelling any further objections. Later, as the workshop cleared out, Ava approached Micah, her expression softer. "You've got good instincts," she said, "and you're not afraid to get your hands dirty. That's a rare combination." Micah looked down, his humility evident. "I just did what I could." Ava smiled. "And that's more than most people would have done. Keep it up, and you'll do well here." Her words lingered in Micah's mind as he left the workshop. For the first time, he began to feel like he might belong in this world of innovation. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he was starting to believe he could handle whatever challenges came his way. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Callahan home as Micah pedaled up the driveway, the crisp air carrying a faint chill. He leaned his bike against the porch, his mind buzzing with everything that had happened at Tesla. For the first time in days, he felt hopeful, as though the future might hold something more than late nights in the garage and overdue bills. As he stepped inside, however, the atmosphere was different. The small kitchen, usually filled with the comforting sounds of Evelyn humming while cooking, was silent. Sadie sat at the table, her head bowed over her schoolwork, her pencil tapping nervously against the page. "Sadie?" Micah asked, setting his bag down. "Where's Mom?" Sadie looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "She's at the hospital," she said softly. "She collapsed at work." Micah's chest tightened, the air around him suddenly feeling too thick. "What? Why didn't anyone call me?" "She told me not to," Sadie said, her voice cracking. "She didn't want to distract you." Micah didn't wait for more details. He grabbed his keys and bolted out the door, the weight of guilt pressing hard on his chest. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. Micah rushed to the reception desk, his voice breathless. "Evelyn Callahan, where is she?" The nurse glanced at her clipboard. "Room 204. She's stable, but you'll need to wait until the doctor clears her for visitors." Micah slumped into a plastic chair in the waiting area, his head in his hands. Memories of his father's accident came rushing back. The same hospital, the same helpless feeling. He clenched his fists, cursing himself for not noticing how tired Evelyn had been, for being too caught up in his own dreams. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor appeared, his expression calm but serious. "Micah Callahan?" Micah stood quickly. "Is she okay?" "She's stable," the doctor assured him. "Your mother's been overworking herself, and it's taken a toll on her health. She needs rest, proper nutrition, and significantly less stress. If she doesn't slow down, it could lead to more serious complications." Micah nodded, barely able to process the words. "Can I see her?" The doctor gestured down the hall. "Go ahead, but keep it brief. She needs to rest." Evelyn's hospital room was dimly lit, the soft hum of machines and the faint beeping of monitors filling the stillness. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung in the air, sharp and clinical. Evelyn lay propped up against the pillows, her usually vibrant face pale and shadowed. Her hands rested limply at her sides, thin and frail against the stark white of the hospital sheets. When she saw Micah step into the room, her tired eyes lit up, and a weak but genuine smile crossed her face. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with warmth. Micah's throat tightened at the sight of her. His mother, the strongest person he knew, looked so fragile, so vulnerable. He sank into the chair beside her bed, gripping the armrests to steady himself. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me know you weren't feeling well?" Evelyn reached for his hand with trembling fingers, her touch still as gentle as ever. "I didn't want to worry you," she said softly, her voice thin but steady. "You've been doing so much already, Micah. I didn't want to add more to your plate. Micah looked down at her frail hand in his, a storm of emotions swirling inside him. Doing so much, he said, his frustration breaking through. His voice rose, but not in anger, in desperation. Mom, you're in a hospital bed. You collapsed at work, and you're telling me not to worry. This isn't fine. You're not fine. Evelyn's smile wavered, a flicker of pain crossing her face, not from her illness, but from seeing the anguish in her son's eyes. I'm doing what I have to do, she said, her voice soft but resolute. For you. For Sadie. That's what matters. Micah shook his head, his vision blurring with tears he fought to hold back. No, Mom. That's not fair. You've worked yourself into the ground, pushing, sacrificing, doing everything for us. And I haven't done enough. I should have done more. I should have— Stop, Evelyn interrupted, her voice firmer now, despite her frailty. She cupped his cheek with her hand, her touch warm and grounding. You listen to me, Micah Callahan. You've done more than enough. You've been carrying so much already. You've been trying to fix everything, to hold this family together, and I couldn't be prouder of you. But you can't put everything on yourself. Micah blinked, the tears slipping down his cheeks despite his best efforts. But I don't want to lose you, Mom. I can't. Not after Dad. Evelyn's eyes softened, the mention of her late husband drawing a faint, bittersweet smile to her lips. Your dad wouldn't want you to carry this burden alone, sweetheart. He'd want you to follow your dreams, to build a life you can be proud of, and so do I. Don't let me, hold you back. Micah swallowed hard, his heart aching with guilt and love. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against her hand, letting her touch calm the storm inside him. I love you, son, Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. The two sat there in the quiet room, the noise of the machines fading into the background as they held on to each other. For Micah, the moment was both grounding and galvanizing, a reminder of the strength his mother had always given him and the strength he needed to carry forward. Back home, the weight of the situation crushed down on Micah. The hospital bills, the mounting expenses, Evelyn's fragile health, it all felt like too much. As he sat on the porch steps, staring out at the darkened street, Sadie appeared beside him, her small hand tugging at his sleeve. You okay? She asked, her voice hesitant. Micah didn't answer right away. I don't know, Sadie. Maybe I should quit Tesla, stay here, and help Mom. Sadie frowned, crossing her arms. That's dumb. Micah blinked, caught off guard by her bluntness. Excuse me? You heard me, Sadie said, her voice firm despite the tears glistening in her eyes. You always fix everything, Micah. Cars, bikes, even that old toaster. You can fix this too. You can fix everything, even our future. Micah stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him. Sadie, it's not that simple. Yes, it is, she insisted. You've always been the one who doesn't give up, Micah. Don't start now. Unbeknownst to Micah, Elon Musk had come to learn about Evelyn's condition through conversations with Tesla staff who had grown fond of Micah's story. Deeply moved by the Callahan family's resilience and Micah's determination, Elon decided to quietly step in. That evening, without any fanfare or formal acknowledgement, Evelyn's mounting medical expenses were fully covered. When the hospital staff informed Evelyn the next morning, they simply stated that her account had been settled anonymously. Confused yet profoundly relieved, Evelyn pressed for more details, but none were provided. The gesture remained a quiet mystery, but its impact was undeniable. A burden had been lifted, giving the Callahan family a much-needed moment of peace. As the days passed, Micah's resolve grew stronger. Evelyn's quiet encouragement and Sadie's unshakable belief in him were like anchors, grounding him in moments of doubt. He began to see that giving up wasn't the answer. It never had been. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his family, their sacrifices, and the opportunities that now lay before him. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table, the dim light from the overhead lamp casting soft shadows across the room, Micah sketched ideas for a Tesla project he'd been mulling over. His pencil moved almost instinctively across the page, translating his thoughts into shapes and concepts. Yet, his mind kept drifting back to the hospital and the way Evelyn had looked at him with pride, even from her sickbed. Evelyn approached quietly, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. Micah turned to look at her, her face still pale but carrying a strength that seemed to fuel his own. "Whatever you decide, Micah," she said softly, her voice steady despite her weariness. "We're proud of you. Always." Micah nodded, a faint smile forming, but as he held her gaze, he hesitated. He had pieced together what no one had told him outright. The sudden disappearance of the medical bills, the way the staff had spoken with quiet reverence when they mentioned the anonymous benefactor. It could only have been Elon Musk. The realization weighed on him, not as a burden, but as a call to action. "Mom," he said, his voice resolute, "I think I know who paid the hospital bills." Evelyn frowned slightly, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "Who?" "Elon," Micah said simply. "It has to be him. He's the only one who'd do something like that and not say a word about it." Evelyn's expression softened, and she gave a small nod. "If that's true, then he sees something in you, Micah. Something you've always had, but didn't believe in yourself." Micah took a deep breath, his shoulders squaring. "I won't let him down," he said firmly. "I won't let any of you down. I'm going to make the most of this, for you, for Sadie, for Dad, and for myself. I owe it to all of us." Evelyn squeezed his shoulder gently, her eyes glistening with pride. "Then go do it, Micah. Show the world what you're made of." Micah returned to his sketches with renewed determination, his path clearer than it had ever been. He wasn't just chasing a dream anymore. He was building a future for his family and for the faith that others had placed in him. The Tesla gigafactory hummed with activity as Micah walked through its massive corridors, his heart pounding in rhythm with the industrial sounds around him. It was his second week at Tesla, and the initial awe he'd felt on his first visit had been replaced by a sharper focus. He wasn't just here to observe, he was here to prove himself. Today's task, however, felt like a steep mountain to climb. A prototype electric vehicle, EV, was malfunctioning, and Elon himself had suggested Micah take a crack at diagnosing and fixing the issue. The stakes were higher than ever. "Welcome back, Callahan," came a voice, sharp and tinged with sarcasm. Micah turned to see Caleb Ryan, a tall, clean-cut intern with a polished appearance that screamed privilege. Caleb leaned casually against a nearby workbench, his expression oozing skepticism. "Didn't expect to see you here again," Caleb continued. "Tesla must really be scraping the bottom of the barrel." Micah stiffened, but forced himself to stay calm. "Good to see you too, Caleb," he said, his tone measured. As Micah approached the prototype EV, Ava Collins appeared, clipboard in hand. Her sharp gaze softened slightly when she saw Micah. "Micah," she said with a nod, "here's the situation. This prototype is experiencing irregular voltage spikes in its battery system. We need to stabilize it before it can move to the next phase of testing." Micah examined the vehicle, its sleek exterior hiding the intricate technology within. "Got it," he said, rolling up his sleeves. Ava hesitated for a moment. "And Micah?" He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Don't let anyone get in your head," she said firmly. Micah nodded, understanding the subtext of her words. The challenge proved more daunting than Micah had anticipated. As he opened the EV's hood, he was greeted by a maze of wires, sensors, and advanced components, far more complex than anything he'd worked on before. He began his assessment, using diagnostic tools to trace the source of the voltage spikes. Caleb watched from a distance, occasionally muttering under his breath to a nearby engineer. "This is a waste of time," Micah overheard. "He's just a kid with no formal training." The comments stung, but Micah pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. He noticed a cluster of sensors near the battery pack that seemed slightly misaligned. Carefully, he adjusted their positioning and ran another diagnostic. The voltage spikes decreased, but didn't disappear entirely. "It's a start," Micah murmured to himself, grabbing a multimeter to measure the current flow. "You sure you know what you're doing?" Caleb called out, his voice loud enough to draw attention. Micah turned to face him, his jaw tightening. "Why don't you let the results speak for themselves?" The room fell silent as the engineers nearby watched the exchange. Ava stepped forward, her eyes narrowing at Caleb. "That's enough, Caleb," she said coolly. "Let him work." Micah returned to the EV, his mind racing. The sensors were part of the problem, but there had to be something else causing the instability. He traced the wiring harness, looking for anything out of place. That's when he spotted it, a frayed wire hidden behind a bundle of cables. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to disrupt the current flow. He grabbed a soldering kit and set to work, carefully repairing the damaged wire. Then, he adjusted the sensors one last time and reran the diagnostic. The voltage readings leveled out, stable and consistent. Micah stepped back, his heart pounding as he waited for Ava's verdict. She ran her own diagnostic, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up, a small smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "Voltage stabilized," she announced. The engineers murmured in approval, and Caleb's smug expression faltered. As the workshop cleared out, Ava approached Micah, her tone softer than usual. "You handled yourself well," she said, "and not just with the EV. You didn't let Caleb get to you. That's important." Micah shrugged, his humility evident. "I just wanted to fix the problem." Ava tilted her head, studying him. "You've got more than just technical skill, Micah. You've got grit. That's going to take you far." Her words lingered in Micah's mind as he packed up his tools. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged, not because of where he came from, but because of what he could do. Outside the gigafactory, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Micah stood by the bus stop, the weight of the day finally lifting. He thought of his mother and Sadie, of the sacrifices they had made for him to be here. "I can do this," he whispered to himself, the quiet confidence in his voice growing stronger. The Tesla Executive Lounge was unlike anything Micah had ever seen. The sleek design, chrome fixtures, minimalist furniture, and a glass wall offering a panoramic view of the sprawling gigafactory exuded both sophistication and innovation. Micah shifted nervously in one of the plush chairs, feeling out of place in his jeans and hoodie. Elon Musk entered the room with a relaxed stride, a faint smile on his face. He carried 2 cups of coffee, setting one down in front of Micah before taking the seat across from him. "Micah," Elon began, his tone casual but thoughtful, "how are you finding Tesla so far?" "It's incredible," Micah said, gripping the warm coffee cup tightly. "I've learned so much already. Honestly, I didn't think I'd even make it this far." Elon leaned back, studying Micah for a moment. "Most people feel that way when they start something new, like they don't belong. You know, when I started Tesla, people thought I was insane. A car company, in the middle of an electric vehicle drought, they told me I'd fail." Micah frowned, surprised. "But you didn't." Elon chuckled. "Oh, I did. Plenty of times. Early on, Tesla was on the brink of bankruptcy. SpaceX nearly didn't get off the ground. And let's not even talk about the mess I made with PayPal before it worked out. But here's the thing. Failure is a necessary step to success." Micah absorbed the words, feeling a flicker of reassurance. "But what if it's too much? The pressure, I mean." Elon's expression softened. "There will always be pressure. But pressure creates diamonds, Micah. It's about how you handle it. You've already proven you can think on your feet, solve problems, and push through challenges. That's more than most people twice your age." Elon gestured toward the panoramic view behind him, the sprawling gigafactory bustling with energy. Engineers moved purposefully along the assembly lines, robotic arms worked with precision, and Tesla vehicles gleamed under the bright industrial lights. The sight was awe-inspiring, a testament to human ingenuity and determination. "This," Elon said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of passion, "isn't just about cars. It's about solving problems, rethinking what's possible, and building a better future. That's what Tesla stands for, and that's what I see in you, a builder, someone who doesn't just see problems, but sees solutions where others don't even know to look." Micah's breath hitched, the weight of Elon's words sinking in. He glanced out the window, the enormity of the vision before him almost too much to grasp. I don't know if I'm ready for all this," he admitted, his voice low and uncertain. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, gripping the warm coffee cup, as if it were the only thing anchoring him. "My family," he continued, hesitating as he searched for the right words. "They're counting on me. I don't want to let them down." Elon leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze softening just enough to convey understanding. "Micah, I get it. You're scared, and you should be. If you weren't, I'd be worried. But let me tell you something. You don't have to choose between your dreams and your family. In fact, pursuing your dreams might be the best thing you can do for them. Micah blinked, unsure. How? If I mess up, if I fail, what then? What happens to them if I don't make it? Elon's expression shifted, the intensity in his eyes growing sharper as he leaned closer. You will mess up, Micah. You will fail. I've failed more times than I can count. Tesla, SpaceX, PayPal, all of them were born out of failure after failure. There were times I thought we'd lose everything. But failure isn't the end. It's part of the process. It's how you learn, how you grow. Micah's fingers traced the rim of his cup, his throat tightening as he listened. But what if I'm not strong enough to get back up? Elon's voice softened, but it carried a weight that felt impossible to ignore. The question isn't whether you'll fall, it's what you'll do after you do. Will you let it define you, or will you use it to get stronger? That's what matters. That's what separates the dreamers from the doers. Micah stared at the table, Elon's words swirling in his mind. He thought of the nights his mother stayed up late working, the way Sadie looked at him with unwavering belief, and the lessons his father had instilled in him in their garage. Slowly, the fear that had been gripping him began to loosen, replaced by a flicker of something else. Determination. Elon leaned back, a faint smile on his lips. And Micah, don't underestimate what you've already done. You've got grit, creativity, and a willingness to tackle the impossible. Those are things no school or job can teach. They're just you. Micah finally looked up, his eyes meeting Elon's. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't just being seen, he was being believed in. Ava Collins entered the lounge, her usual clipboard absent. She smiled at Micah before taking a seat beside Elon. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to join this conversation, she said. Elon gestured for her to continue. Micah, Ava began, her tone warm but firm. You've already faced challenges most people wouldn't dare take on. You've proven yourself capable, but I know how hard it is to take that next step, especially when your family is depending on you. Micah nodded, grateful for her understanding. I was in a similar position once, Ava continued. I almost didn't take my first engineering job because I was worried about leaving my family behind. But what I realized was that succeeding didn't mean abandoning them. It meant finding a way to honor them in what I did. Her words struck a chord with Micah. He thought of his mother's quiet strength, Sadie's unwavering belief in him, and his father's legacy as a mechanic. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to Micah. This, he said, is a scholarship offer for a mechanical engineering program. It's partnered with a paid internship here at Tesla. We'll cover your tuition, and you'll earn while you learn. Micah stared at the envelope, his mind racing. The opportunity was everything he'd dreamed of, and more, but the weight of responsibility tugged at him. What about my mom and Sadie? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava smiled gently. We're not asking you to leave them behind, Micah. You'll still be close enough to visit, and we'll work with your schedule to make sure you're not overwhelmed. This is about building a future, for you and for them. Micah hesitated, the decision heavy in his hands. But as he looked at Elon and Ava, he saw not just expectations, but belief. A belief that he could do this, that he could succeed. I'll do it, he said finally, his voice steady with resolve. I'll give it everything I've got. Elon smiled, leaning back in his chair. That's all we can ask for, Micah. Welcome to Tesla. As Micah left the lounge, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand, he felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he truly believed he could handle it. Looking out at the horizon, he whispered to himself, "This is for you, Dad." The hum of Tesla's gigafactory was familiar now, but today felt different. Micah stood near the entrance, his heart racing with anticipation. For weeks, he'd been immersed in projects, learning from some of the brightest minds in engineering, but today wasn't about him alone. It was about the two people who mattered most in his life. A sleek black Tesla SUV pulled up, and the doors opened to reveal Evelyn and Sadie stepping out. Evelyn adjusted her cardigan, her face a mix of awe and nervousness, while Sadie practically bounced with excitement. "Micah!" Sadie called out, waving wildly. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "Hey, Squirt," Micah said with a laugh. ruffling her hair. Evelyn approached more slowly, her eyes scanning the massive facility. "This place is incredible," she said softly. Micah grinned, gesturing toward the sprawling factory behind him. "Wait until you see inside." As they entered, Evelyn's breath caught. The vast expanse of the gigafactory stretched out before them, its gleaming machines and robotic arms moving with precision. Sadie's eyes widened as she took in the sight of electric vehicles in various stages of assembly, their sleek designs shining under the bright lights. "This is where you work?" Evelyn asked, her voice tinged with wonder. "Yep," Micah replied. "Well, not just here. I've been working on something in one of the smaller labs." Sadie tugged at his sleeve. "Can we see it?" Micah hesitated, then nodded. "Come on, there's something I want to show you both." They made their way to a quieter section of the factory, where Micah had been given a small workspace to develop his independent project. He opened the door to reveal a prototype vehicle, a compact electric car designed for affordability and efficiency. Its design was simple yet innovative, with sleek lines and a modular battery system that Micah had spent weeks perfecting. "It's still a work in progress," Micah said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But the idea is to make EVs more accessible for families like ours. Something affordable, but still high quality." Evelyn stepped closer, running her hand along the smooth surface of the car. "You built this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "With some help," Micah admitted. "But yeah, most of it's mine." Sadie beamed. "It's awesome! Can I drive it when I'm older?" Micah laughed. "We'll see, Squirt." As they toured the rest of the facility, Micah felt a swell of pride seeing his family so amazed by his work. Evelyn asked thoughtful questions, her curiosity outweighing her initial shyness, while Sadie marveled at everything from the robots to the test track. Their visit ended in the cafeteria, where Evelyn and Sadie sat across from Micah, their trays filled with sandwiches and fresh fruit. "I'm so proud of you," Evelyn said suddenly, her eyes glistening. "I don't think I've said that enough." Micah looked down, his throat tightening. "Thanks, Mom. I wouldn't be here without you and Sadie." Sadie grinned, taking a big bite of her sandwich. "I knew you'd do it, Micah. I told you." As they left, Micah felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he saw how his work at Tesla could create a better future, not just for him, but for his family too. A few days later, Micah was back in the lab when a familiar voice interrupted his focus. "Nice work on that prototype," Caleb Bryan said, leaning against the doorframe. Micah looked up, surprised. Caleb's tone lacked its usual sarcasm, and his expression seemed genuine. "Thanks," Micah replied cautiously. Caleb stepped closer, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Look, I owe you an apology. I was a jerk when you first got here. I thought you didn't belong, but I was wrong. You're good, better than good." Micah blinked, taken aback. "Thanks, Caleb. That means a lot." Caleb nodded, then added with a smirk, "But don't think I'm going to make it easy for you. Competition keeps us sharp." Micah laughed. "Wouldn't want it any other way." That evening, as Micah sat at his workbench sketching ideas for the next phase of his project, he reflected on how far he'd come. He thought of the dusty garage in Bastrop, where he'd first learned to tinker with engines, and of his father's words. Fixing machines is one thing. Fixing the world is something else entirely. He smiled, glancing at the framed photo of his family he'd placed on the corner of his desk. He wasn't just building cars, he was building a future. The spotlight gleamed against the polished stage, the Tesla logo glowing brightly on the massive screen behind it. The audience at the National Tesla Innovation event, a mix of industry leaders, engineers, and media, buzzed with anticipation. This was the moment Micah had been working toward for the past year. And as he stood backstage, his heart raced. He adjusted the cuffs of his crisp-fitted blazer, borrowed from Max, who had insisted he look the part. His mother and Sadie sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride, while Mr. Harlan, who had made the trip from Bastrop, offered a knowing nod of encouragement. The announcer's voice boomed across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are proud to introduce a visionary mind shaping the future of affordable electric vehicles, Micah Callahan." Micah stepped onto the stage, his nerves giving way to a growing confidence as the audience erupted into applause. The prototype EV he had designed sat center stage, its sleek, compact frame gleaming under the lights. Taking a deep breath, Micah approached the podium. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "A little over a year ago, I was fixing old trucks in my backyard in Bastrop, Texas. I never imagined I'd be here today, standing in front of you, presenting something I built with my own two hands." He gestured toward the car. "This is the Nova, a prototype designed to make electric vehicles accessible to families like mine. It's efficient, affordable, and built to last. But more than that, it represents what's possible when someone believes in you, even when you don't yet believe in yourself." Micah paused, his eyes scanning the room, finally landing on his mother and Sadie. "This car isn't just about innovation. It's about the people who inspired me, my family, my mentors, and the team at Tesla. Without them, this wouldn't exist." The crowd responded with a standing ovation, their enthusiasm filling the room. As Micah stepped back from the podium, Elon Musk joined him on stage, a proud smile on his face. Elon placed a hand on Micah's shoulder and turned to the audience. "Micah Callahan isn't just building cars. He's building a better world, a world where sustainable technology is available to everyone, not just the privileged few." Turning to Micah, Elon continued, his voice quieter but no less impactful. "You've proven that with determination, creativity, and heart, even the biggest challenges can be overcome, and you've reminded all of us what this work is really about." Micah's chest tightened as he listened, humbled by the moment. The applause swelled again as Elon handed him the microphone. Later that evening, the Callahan family stood together near the stage, surrounded by congratulatory smiles and warm handshakes. Sadie clutched a piece of Tesla merchandise, a miniature version of Micah's prototype, and beamed up at her brother. "You're famous now," she declared, grinning from ear to ear. Micah chuckled. "Not quite, Squirt, but I'll take it." Evelyn placed a hand on his arm, her eyes glistening. "I'm so proud of you, Micah. Your dad would be too." He swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Thanks, Mom. I wouldn't have made it without you and Sadie." "And Mr. Harlan," Sadie added, waving toward the older man, who nodded in acknowledgement. The following week, the Callahan family moved into a comfortable new home, a far cry from their modest house in Bastrop. The neighborhood was quiet and filled with opportunities: good schools for Sadie, a garden for Evelyn, and a garage for Micah to continue tinkering. Evelyn's health had improved significantly with proper rest and less stress, and Sadie thrived in her new school, proudly telling anyone who would listen about her brother, the Tesla genius. Despite his success, Micah never forgot where he came from. He established a program at Tesla to mentor underprivileged youth, offering them opportunities to explore careers in engineering and technology. He also worked with local schools in Bastrop, donating resources and speaking to students about his journey. One evening, as Micah stood in his new garage, sketching designs for the next phase of his project, he felt a familiar weight on his shoulder. Looking up, he saw Evelyn smiling down at him. "You're making a difference, Micah," she said softly. "Not just for us, but for so many others." Micah smiled, the words filling him with a quiet resolve. "That's the goal, Mom, to help others the way I've been helped." A year later, at another Tesla event, Micah unveiled the production model of the Nova. Orders poured in from around the world, and the project became a symbol of hope and possibility for working families everywhere. As the event concluded, Micah stood on stage, looking out at the crowd. His mother and Sadie waved from the front row, their pride evident. He thought of his father, of Mr. Harlan, of everyone who had believed in him when he couldn't see his own potential. Turning back to the audience, he said, "This isn't just about building cars. It's about building a world where everyone has the chance to succeed. And I hope to keep building that world for a long time." The crowd erupted into applause, but Micah's focus was elsewhere, on the horizon, where his next challenge waited. As Micah's story closes with a brighter future for himself and his family, it leaves us with profound lessons about perseverance, gratitude, and the power of belief. From the dusty streets of Bastrop to the sleek halls of Tesla, Micah's journey shows us that even the most humble beginnings can lead to extraordinary achievements when paired with determination and the right opportunities. It's also a reminder that success doesn't have to come at the expense of those we love. Micah never forgot his family, and his success became their success, proving that ambition and loyalty can coexist beautifully. So, what about you? What challenges have you faced that seemed insurmountable? Have there been moments when someone's belief in you made all the difference? Or maybe there's a dream you've been too afraid to pursue. What's stopping you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences or perspectives in the comments below. What did Micah's journey inspire in you? And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next inspiring tale. Together, let's continue celebrating the power of human resilience, kindness, and ambition. See you in the next story.